are so grateful that Aberdeen Coast Guard, we are reading you loud and clear.
Hello, Julia Gosling here, and welcome to Sea Views podcast. And I have got Paul Shepherd here with me, who is the chair of CHIRP Superyacht Board. So welcome to you,
Thank you,
Paul.
Julia. Thank you for having us on.
Yeah, and where are you today?
I'm in Cyprus, enjoying the sunshine.
Very nice. I'm sure that's absolutely lovely.
It's certainly better than the grey, cold, rainy Amsterdam where we were last week at Metz, the Superyacht Forum. So yes, for sure.
Yeah. You're back to dry out now.
Exactly.
Great. I'm so pleased you could join us. And I'm wondering if you'd like to actually introduce yourself and your role with CHIRP that you've taken on in the superyacht sector.
Yeah, absolutely. Love to. I'm a master mariner, unlimited, and I have a mixed yacht and commercial background. I started off on cruise ships and did a whole bunch of different types of vessels before spending some time in the yachting sector. And I remember CHIRP from back in the good old days when stuff was printed out, and in the library you would have a little stack of copies of CHIRP when I was a cadet, and I'd always pick it up and have a read of it. And I always just thought it was such a brilliant idea and something that I learned a lot from. Wind forward, I came ashore about 8 years or so ago now, and I ended up doing a few different bits and bobs. I didn't really want a job, so I ended up doing a little bit of teaching at Warsash Maritime Academy. I also set up my own company, Whitehorse Maritime Academy, for mostly doing orals prep for the exams that we have to do for our. And then along that way, I was speaking to more and more yacht crew. And while I have got some yacht experience directly, I wouldn't claim to be the most experienced individual from the yachting sector by any means. But what kind of kept coming up was that there was a lot of these incidents, accidents, things that had gone a bit wrong. And so I was meeting a lot of people from the yacht sector and having a lot of conversations and realizing that there was a lot of actual appetite to share amongst the community, actually for our own benefit. And those conversations were happening. Let's say this happened to me, there was this accident, there was that near miss. And a lot of those conversations would happen, but they might happen in a crew bar or among friends or in a sort of private WhatsApp group, or even at the most optimum end of the spectrum. Maybe you have an excellent management company that takes instant reporting seriously, and then those incidents are shared within other vessels within that management company. But there was two things missing. One is the confidential element of what CHIRP does, which is the C in CHIRP. CHIRP stands for Confidential Hazardous Incident Reporting Program. And the confidential element is, we can go into more detail about how that works later on, but it's absolutely fundamental to the way that CHIRP operates. And it provides a real, I think, comfort and reassurance and a sort of safety blanket for people who aren't in those lovely safety culture, everybody, we value reporting type environments, which unfortunately not everybody is. So they can have trust that they are going to do the sharing because it's a benefit, but also do it in a way they're not going to have any comeback on them. And then the other side of it, I think, is just that there is a real eagerness for people to not only share, but also to learn from each other, as others would call it, mistakes, incidents, whatever it is. And because that's how we get better. And Adam, unfortunately, who isn't here today, has a lovely one-liner he likes to trot out at every opportunity, which is that you don't have enough time to make all of the mistakes yourself. And I think that really is the underpinning of this, isn't it? Because we can actually do better than just having to have all of the bad experiences ourselves.
Yes, I think that learning and sharing side of it is so important, because there's this sort of bit of a stigma around the word reporting, even as if it's whistleblowing or it's going to cause lots of trouble. But that isn't how it works with CHIRP, is it, in terms of reporting?
No, it's not. There's different elements of what CHIRP does. Perhaps I can briefly explain the process to the listeners, and that might help. Is we have a person will have either they'll be involved in an incident, or maybe they're involved in their miss, or maybe they're just some lesson they learnt on board from a little thing that they think they can share. And they can go onto the CHIRP website, onto the app, they can email, they can phone call, they can do whatever contact method that they feel most appropriate. And then they are speaking to the secretariat, which is Adam and a chap called Dave, who is his right hand. And at that point, they are already within this confidential environment, and absolutely anything that is said there cannot be shared with anybody. And they take this so seriously. I think this is the important point, is that, as you said, I'm the chair of what we call the Superyacht Advisory Board. So it's me and a group of about 24 properly active yacht crew. And so they're like either actively on board or actively involved in yacht management. And so the people who are then discuss those reports as that second stage are people who genuinely know what they're talking about and actually have deep experience of the sector. And I'm the only person who isn't like currently on board, basically within that, or currently in yacht management, who's even involved with that. But an example of the confidentiality is that Adam and Dave, they won't tell me the name, the gender, the age, the size of the vessel, the name of the vessel, the flag of the vessel. They won't tell me that. If they're not going to tell the chair of the board who talks about the reports anything about the report, I think that shows you the level of confidentiality that's in place. And then we then talk about the reports, and sometimes we say that actually we need to go back for more information on this. Like, there's not enough here to be able to talk about. And if there's enough there, we'll give an opinion on it. Basically, we'll say that we think ideally this would have happened, or maybe this recommendation, or whatever it's going to be. And then those are published. And I think if you look at our published reports, the other thing along the confidential angle that you'll see is that there's no details at all. It isn't a 72-meter yacht at anchor off Portofino on late November 2025. No, it's a yacht at sea, like underway, at anchor, or alongside, and that's it. There's never any mention of sizes, never any mention of locations, never any mention of the number of crew. Like, it's insane how sanitized the report is by the time it comes out.
But that works to protect identity, doesn't it? And it is really interesting the way they do that, because I think, Adam said something like in 20 years, they've never had a breach of confidentiality.
Yeah, I mean, so the maritime side of it, so the aviation, it's a UK registered charity. Aviation is 40 years old, and then 20 years ago, a chap who I actually know and I knew before this was the one who set up the maritime side of it. And then about 3 years ago or so, I met Adam at an event, and I said to him, there needs to be a yacht version of this because of my experience of talking to crew, et cetera, et cetera. And he kind of said, I'm sure he would deny this, but he kind of said, go on then. and I didn't step back fast enough.
You didn't.
No, and so now here I am 3 years later. We've done 10 publications so far, and I think the level of engagement and support from the industry for the idea of it, I think is really heartening. And it just proves the point that actually, if you'd had this discussion with people 4 years ago and you'd said, we're going to do a confidential reporting, sharing thing for the yacht sector, everyone would have gone, nah, it's not going to work. We don't need that. And yet
no one would talk.
Exactly. No one would talk. And exactly. Yes. And like, it does exist. It is working. It has got massive support. I was at Metz and the Superyacht Forum last week, and CHIRP, in my role as CHIRP, and I was invited onto 3 separate panels over the space of 2 days. I was invited onto 2 separate sets of podcasts to talk about CHIRP, and I couldn't make it 10 meters down one of the corridors in the trade show or in the conference without somebody wanting to talk about CHIRP. So I think that just proves that there is real appetite to do that sharing. You mentioned about the whistleblowing part of it, right? Which is
some people's fear, isn't it?
I think it is.
I'm going to get in trouble, or I'm going to get someone in trouble.
Exactly. And I think that's why it's really important to have these types of conversations, right? Because you actually get to see behind the words a little bit and behind those fears. And you're absolutely right. I think there are some people who think that going to CHIRP is almost like a bit of a nuclear option, and almost akin to going and talking to the flag state or something like that. And people shouldn't think of it like that in the slightest. It is not a nuclear option. It is simply a case of, this happened to me, I would prefer it doesn't happen to you. And that's it. And so that's why when we talk about this, particularly within the yachting sector, within my domain, I always try and de-emphasize the word reporting or the word whistleblowing or those types of concepts, because they do have a role. Don't get me wrong. It's a very important thing that some people have to feel there is a place they can go. But I typically emphasize more the kind of the sharing part of it, and the learning and the sharing, and the fact that it's not it's not a replacement for internal company management reporting systems. It's not a replacement for flag state. It is a complement to all of those things.
Yeah, it is. And I think the good point is that every flag state will get reports of very serious incidents, and that's correct. And it should be that way. And in fact, it's mandatory to do that. And that will always be the case. But what's really interesting is that those flag state reporting systems don't tend to get, if you like, what you might call the near misses. And those are some of the things that you could really learn from before it happens to someone else.
A near miss is roughly defined as an accident that didn't happen. And nearly didn't happen. And it's the difference between a spanner dropping from a loft and landing 1 meter that way or landing here. It's the same thing happened. The same chain of events happened. It's just that luckily nobody got hurt. And there's a ratio there of near misses to accidents, quite a strong ratio. And it gives us opportunities. Every near miss is an opportunity to prevent an accident. And every near miss that we don't talk about is a missed opportunity to prevent that accident.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about reports and systems and it doesn't sound very human, but you've been doing a lot of work with this over the last 4 years with a great group of very experienced professionals also contributing. Do you feel like you might have saved a life?
It's funny you say that, actually, because my wife rewrote my LinkedIn bio a couple of years ago now. And previously it was Paul Shepherd is a master mariner, blah, 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 blah. And she actually interviewed me. She sat down and we had a little interview and she rewrote it and she said, there you go, there's your new bio. And the first line was, I wonder if I've saved any lives yet. And that was like, oh, okay. You've gone right to the core of that, haven't you? And you're absolutely right. The problem with it is it's an unanswerable question, isn't it? You can't know about the people who didn't get hurt by something, but you don't do it. You don't get involved in these things. And I would just like to point out that this is not me by any means. That group of people who are involved in the Superyacht Advisory Board, the individuals who print out the reports on board, publications on board, and sit down with the crew and bring them into safety meetings, the people in the management companies who go out of their way to make sure that these individual publications are distributed within their fleet circulars to all of their vessels. It's everybody who's involved with it. But just to focus on the advisory board for a moment, everybody in that is giving up their time. They are attending meetings quarterly or so for several hours to talk about these individual reports we've received with no glory. Their name isn't on anything. Like they don't get any appreciation or anything except the fact they think it's important. And I think that is the human story here, because ultimately this boils down to, like I said, it's the individual on board who says, this happened to me or nearly happened to me, and I don't want it to happen to someone else. That's a very human, a very personal story. And then we have a whole bunch of people along the chain the other way who are saying, I want that not to happen to me or to my people. And that's also a very personal human story.
Yeah, it is about people. It's not about reports. It's about people and learning and sharing, isn't it? So I like that. I think that's probably what drives people like you. I worked in the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency for 18 years on behaviour change campaigns. And like you say, you very rarely know for sure if you've actually created a negative, i.e. something didn't happen because of what you did. Yeah. But you hope it did. And occasionally you do find out, but it's rare. I wonder. Well,
that's why, if I may, just briefly, one of the things that I find really rather heartening is when you go and speak to somebody, you bump into someone, CHIRP comes up in conversation and they go, oh yeah, I know CHIRP. I use those publications all the time for crew briefings, or I do got quite a lot of onboard training, and I'll go on board a yacht and do various different bits of training. And I walked into the crew mess once and there was the CHIRP publication from the last quarter was printed out and stuck on the notice board. Yeah. And I was like, did you do that for me? And they're like, what do you mean? I'm involved in CHIRP. And they're like, are you? Oh, no. We just put it up there every time it comes out because it's really good. Oh, that's cool. You're involved with it. So that is the heartening thing. It's not the accident that didn't happen so much, because that's an impossible thing to try and judge. But the fact that you have people who go, this is a really good idea and this is really worthwhile and it matters for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, that's brilliant. That's very nice. That was a heartwarming day.
Warm and fluffy, exactly.
Yeah, that's right. All that work. So what actually, if you're thinking about some of the issues that are coming up and some of the things that you're seeing in these reports and also in your work, what keeps you awake? What's worrying you? What are the sort of issues in the superyacht sector? Particularly?
I think that's a really interesting question. I'd probably divide it into two strands. I think CHIRP is quite good at is like bashing the drum of stuff that we know. Like the best example of that would probably be work aloft. and we can talk about that in a moment, where we know it happens a lot and it's a bad thing, and we just need to keep bashing the drum until eventually the message lands somewhere, and gradually we make the industry a little bit better. But the other thing, which I think CHIRP has actually proven to be quite good at, which surprised me a little bit, is almost talking about some maybe emergent themes, which weren't necessarily something that everyone was super aware of, or something that was being, not that they weren't being talked about anywhere else, but just like the idea that you have a platform where an individual person somewhere who is facing an issue where there isn't perhaps the guidance in place, or there isn't perhaps a significant amount of case studies of these accidents. Lithium-ion batteries would be a good example.
Yeah,
and
a new risk.
Absolutely. And it's something that everybody was talking about a couple of years ago, around the time when CHIRP kind of started. And we had all these reports coming in about lithium-ion battery fires. And luckily, actually, the number of those reports does seem to be tailing off. I don't have the numbers for that, but it does, anecdotally, it does feel like it is. But that was also an opportunity for that sort of emergent risks to be talked about. And another good example of something, because I'm not an engineer and I won't claim to be, engine start batteries, which had been replaced, where the rating of the battery was unsuitable for the rating of the charging unit. And it seems like something which is fairly obscure and down there in the bilges. But then we've had, I think, 3 or 4 accidents where you've had batteries that have just exploded. And those types of batteries don't explode in a kind of like you're going to get hit by fragments kind of way. They will, if they might damage a deck plate or something, but what they will do is fill the atmosphere with vaporized acid. So that's not cool.
Not good.
Basically.
Not good.
And that was a little campaign that we ran where we actually, there's a bit of a theme here. This is not okay. And there are engineering members as well in the board. We're like, yeah, this is like properly serious if that's not being done properly. So we did a little focus on that, and we made a little checklist that one of our engineers came up with, who said, these are the checks that you need to carry out on your engine start batteries for your emergency generator, for your main generators. This is what you need to do. And that's also a great output for us as well, because it's something that perhaps isn't everybody's talking about it all the time, but it's very much is the answer. To go back to
it's emergent, isn't it? Yeah, it's new risks that are coming up that you're seeing right away because your reporting is more or less live, really, day to day.
Yeah,
I think that could be really interesting as finding out what's happening well before even authorities do.
Yeah, because they take time, right? You need to do a lot of analysis and everything else. But the one that keeps me up at night, to come back to that, because there's those 2 streams. Right now, there are dozens of young men and women who are standing on a loft on a wet, soapy surface, sloping surface, outside of any railings, without any type of protective fall arrest equipment, without anybody watching them, standing either a significant drop above the water or standing a significant drop above bits of yacht or the concrete. And that is happening right now, and dozens of times, instances right now. And that's the thing that keeps me awake, because there is going to be, there's just a splat moment, right? There's going to be a person who ends up being a lot flatter than they were when they started, to be flippant about it. And that is happening right now, and we know that it's happening, and we know that that it shouldn't be happening. And
it doesn't even happen on building sites now. You're not allowed to do that. You're not even there's a lot of controls there. So why isn't it happening?
Well, that is the why. And I think it's a very complex story. You've got safety culture is a big word, but safety culture ultimately is the key thing there. Safety culture driven by the captain, driven by senior officers, driven by management, where safety is the priority. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't get the same job done. That doesn't mean that the yacht isn't in perfect condition and the owners are happy and everybody's great. It just means that safety, we do that while being safe. And with the work aloft example, what's so baffling about it is that there is extensive guidance on this. This is not a new thing that we've suddenly started doing and nobody knows how to do it safely. We've got guidance which is there. We've got yacht, and it has to start with the captain, where they're allowing these activities to take place without having these measures in place. We have crew who are willing to do that activity, even though they must notice. They must know that it's unsafe. Like
it's risky.
I used to climb a lot, and when you're in an exposed position, you might continue, but you know it. And so we've got people there who there isn't that safety culture even in the individual to say this is a bit suspect. And also there was one brilliant work aloft example that we had, brilliant in a bad way, where we had 3 crew members who were all working aloft cleaning at the same time. One of them, full PPE, fall arrest harness, the whole 9 yards. But the second one, just a waist belt, which if they fell off would basically just break their spine and they'd be a goner. And the third person wearing nothing at all in the same place. That's more confusing, right?
Yes.
I can almost understand if nobody cares about safety and nobody cares about work aloft and there's no equipment on board and nobody cares about permits to work. You can understand that more than you can with a situation where how on earth did we end up with one person dressed properly and using the correct equipment, one person about to kill themselves and one person definitely about to kill themselves on the same vessel, operated by the same chief officer or the same captain with the same crew, like all looking at each other going, how come he gets a harness? But nobody asked that question. And it's
and it comes down, it sounds like there's a human element there as well, isn't there, of were they just perhaps left to make their own decisions based on their own attitudes to risk, which is perhaps what it sounds like.
Perhaps, yeah. The guy with
the mind boggles.
Yeah, the guy with just the waist belt's got a moderate risk appetite, and the guy with nothing has got a high risk appetite. Maybe that's it. But I think this is where we need to talk about this subject. We need to work with the crew. We need to work with the flag states. And I think Work Aloft is also an excellent example of exactly that happening. And now we talked about earlier on about how I tend to de-emphasize the kind of reporting and the kind of whistleblowing aspects of what CHIRP does. But there are some times where there's an active issue going on. And we get told about it live. And so we all receive a photo from a reporter, maybe on a yacht next door, who either has tried to or doesn't feel comfortable to go and approach that yacht directly and say, come on. But the fact that it's a positive thing, right? Because the crew member on that yacht knows it's wrong. So at least that's something.
Yes, they recognise it.
Exactly. And where we have been sent photos or videos or whatever of this happening live, like there is X yacht in X place, here's a photo, this is happening. And that's where CHIRP swings into a different aspect of how it operates. Because although it is a non-governmental organization, it's a charity, it does have very good relationships with the flag states particularly. And so Adam or Dave will literally pick up the phone to the flag of that yacht and will send them the photo and say, this is happening on one of your yachts right now. What are you going to do about it? And that actually quite dishearteningly has yielded very positive responses. The flag states typically go, you're joking. And they put the phone down, pick up the phone to the management company immediately or directly to the captain if it's not got a management company in the middle, and just, what is going on here? This is unacceptable. And then off the back of several of those, CHIRP has actually worked with Cayman, Marshall, Malta, and several other large yachting flag states to really prioritize work aloft safety. There was a publication that was a safety flyer that Cayman pushed out as part of that group a few months ago, maybe, or a little bit longer, a little bit further back, and really alongside a notice where they emphasize that they are aware of work aloft near misses incidents occurring and setting out their expectations for the fact that it shall be done safely, no question. And so that's also that pressure point that CHIRP can have. It's not just in that kind of problem space where it's talk about a problem, point at a problem, hope people figure out the solution. It can also be applying pressure to these regulators to say, this is either an issue right now and you need to deal with it, or this is an issue in general and we need to be talking about this together. And that partnership has worked very well, I think, so far.
Yeah, that's good. That's where it's needed, isn't it? In almost an emergency situation that's about to happen, really. An intervention is required. So we talked quite a bit about the safety issues that worry, and I'm sure there's more. You could go into more. But what about health and welfare and conditions for crew in this kind of growing industry, this sector? Yeah. Is that an area he reports on?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's two things there. One is crewing, hours of rest, like related issues. They are the core of a lot of the safety things that we're talking about, right? We end up with people who are trying to do their very best with limited resources, be it limited crew or limited time or literally limited resources. And they are fighting every battle to try and make that happen. And that's what's so wonderful about the yacht sector. That's why I love it so much, because it's full of people with such drive and such passion to do what they're doing that they are willing to. The flip side, the negative side, is then they're sometimes forced to cut these corners. So the root cause definitely that we need to acknowledge is the fact that there is, on some yachts, typically 50, 60 meters and down, there are not enough crew often to be able to do the job that is required. And that's why we've been starting to call for, rather than us talking about minimum safe manning, which after all is designed for a vessel to leave a port and go to another port and then arrive. That's what minimum safe manning is designed for at a SOLAS level. And actually we need to now start thinking about what I'm coining minimum operational safe manning. And the distinction there would be that if you are just repositioning the yacht from A to B to pick up guests or whatever, then maybe the safe manning is here, because ultimately all you're doing is maintaining deck and engine watches and you've got a few crew. That's reasonable. But if we are talking about doing a charter for a few weeks where we're expecting to have all of the water sports toys out, all the tenders out, everything for the whole day, all the activities, and then pick up the anchor and sail overnight to then do exactly the same thing again tomorrow for every day for an entire summer season, that is not the same operation as the first one. And so that's why we need to start talking about minimum manning for the intended operations of the vessel. And if we have a vessel which is a single season, quiet family usage during the summer kind of thing, then that's one type of manning. If we're talking about a vessel that is a dual season in that kind of maybe 40, 50 meter space where manning is very difficult or lower, that is going to be chartered very heavily for the entire time, then there's just not the same operation. The crew requirements need to be higher. And so we're envisaging a manning matrix that changes depending on the intended operation of the vessel, so to enable that to be done safely. And so that for me is, when you ask about crew and welfare and conditions and stuff, I think that is fundamental to the rest of the picture. And then there's also the harassment side of it as well.
Yes, sadly.
And it's heartbreaking to hear about any of these cases. Now, there's an organization called ICE1, which runs an absolutely...
I've done a podcast, actually, amazing. One of our previous podcasts about their service. And
absolutely. So it's invaluable. It's a service called Yacht Crew Help, and they have a dedicated team of people who are absolutely incredible. And I have so much respect for ICE1 as an organization. And they have this, helpline that crew can call for whatever it is, but it does typically lean more towards the welfare side of the spectrum. Our role is more on the safety side of the spectrum, but there's an overlap in the middle there, and it's not uncommon that ICE1 will get something that feels a bit more safety regulatory related, which they'll pass to us, and where we might get cases that are more harassment welfare focused, which we will pass to them as the kind of the best party to try and help. And we do get reports. We get too many reports about people who are being harassed. We received a report once, which Dave, the right-hand man, is in a very good position to support, because he's part of an organization called Befrienders Worldwide, which does a lot of this kind of support of a person. And back to the confidentiality angle of it, I was never allowed to know the gender of the person. Like that's how confidential we're talking. But a person who was like hiding in their cabin calling us, because they were being chased around the yacht by the captain, and had been for months, where this seedy monster was placing, I assume himself, but perhaps not, so I also don't know the gender of the captain either, in any position where they could interact with this crew member, talk to this crew member, have personal conversations with this crew member, going out ashore with, or trying to go out ashore with them. It's just gross, right? It's just gross, and it's massively inappropriate. And we had this poor person who had heard of CHIRP or been told about CHIRP, who was absolutely at the end, desperate at the end of their tether. And we were able to be there to help.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And you have all the connections of the other services as well. So there is an interconnectedness. But there is a link anyway, isn't there, between welfare and conditions and mental health and all of it with safety. And Adam and I have often talked about that. And if you're stressed, if you're very down mentally, or you're just tired, all of those things can have such an impact, can't they? There aren't, in some cases, there are some vessels where perhaps the places that you sleep for crew are maybe not adequate. And is that an issue? Is it true that there isn't actually always, you don't always get a cabin? I've seen on some of the smaller vessels in the actual crew area, it looks like some of them sleep in what I could only describe as a coffin.
Yeah, yachts are small. Absolutely. And smaller yachts are smaller still. And crew accommodation, it's very rare that a naval architect starts off with a plan for a beautiful, capacious crew accommodation area and then builds the rest of the yacht around that, unfortunately, as nice as that would be. And yes, I think that is absolutely the case. Now, I would suggest in my experience of being on small yachts and speaking to crew who are on small yachts, the problem is not so much the space, I don't think, because I've spent time on some relatively small but still super yachts, sailing yachts, where the crew accommodation is very tight. Sailing yachts don't have a lot of volume anyway. And nobody complains about the cabin space. No one's going, I need a bigger cabin, because that is part of the it's what it is. But I think that there's a more complex picture there, is that the cabin needs to be clean and in good order and well ventilated and all of those types of things. And we have had reports, some quite horrible to imagine reports actually, of crew who have found themselves in a situation where they're in a mold riddled, damp accommodation space where the shower doesn't work and this doesn't work, and that's just grim, isn't it? And of course,
yes,
the underpinning of it is going to be that you're not going to, if you've had a horrible night's sleep and you're just in a grim environment, that's also culture, isn't it? And we talk about safety culture as if it's kind of like an isolated thing, but it's not. Like, it's about prioritizing that thing. Safety culture is prioritizing safety. Crew culture, if you want to call it that, is critical to that. You can't have a crew that are miserable and expect them to work really safely and conscientiously and everything else. But I would say, while nobody would complain about having a larger cabin, I would say that in my experience, and happy to be corrected by anybody who listens to this, but the problem is not so much the size of the cabin, so much as the making sure that the cabin and space is of appropriate quality, but also then making sure there is enough cabin space for it having enough crew.
Yes.
I would propose that if you spoke to most crew and certainly most senior officers or captains and said, would you prefer the cabin to be 25% bigger, or would you prefer to have 2 more berths? They'd choose the berths.
Yes, because there'd be more people to keep up with the work.
Precisely. And that is the thing which then underpins everything else, right? You're not knackered because over your hours of rest because you haven't got enough crew. If you've got enough crew, you're not making mistakes and cutting corners because everyone's tired or because everybody's overworked or because everyone's in a rush if you've got enough crew. So that's fundamental.
Yes. So there is always a link, isn't there, between welfare, good sleep, hours of work and rest and safety, and also putting on a good service, because that's what the industry is about, isn't it?
That is exactly the point. The whole point of this is that if you've got well-rested, happy crew who operate in an environment where they feel safe and they feel listened to and they feel like they're able to perform at their best, the consequence of that is not just happy crew again. The consequence of it is a happy owner. And that is what the industry wants. That's what we want in CHIRP. That's what everybody wants. And it's just we can work towards it and we can make it even better than it is now.
Yeah, exactly. So there is that element in the super yacht industry with, you mentioned just owners just then. Ultimately, they have owners. And there's an element of discretion. Does that mean that sometimes there's a culture in the industry that, in particular, that they don't want to report because of this, we mustn't talk about who we work for and what we do in any detail? Yes,
without question. But Adam just published in the Super Yacht News a rebuttal to Captain Hatch's article from the Professional Yachting Association just today, and I think some beautiful wording in there, and it's. I wish I could remember it off the top of my head. Actually, can you give me a second to look it up? Because
yes, yeah, fine. And listeners may already have consumed it and read it already.
Yeah, I hope that they do so. There's a couple of really good points here which Adam makes in it. Is that so? Firstly, around the discretion part of it, discretion is critical. No one's debating that. I don't care who the owner of the yacht is. I don't care how much money they've got, and I don't think anybody does. Honestly, like when you've been in and around the industry for long enough, there are the questions that you don't ask because you don't care, because it doesn't matter, and then there are questions that you do ask because they do matter. And I think that we can think of it that way. We can split this in two, because we are not trying to pierce the veil of discretion when it comes to ownership. Don't care. But there's no reason for that type of discretion to be used as an excuse to not talk about things which are generic across the board, across the industry, that can actually make people safer, because that is not affecting the discretion that we give to the owners and guests that are in our environment. And I think that one of the quotes here that Adam had is that silence is survival is the mantra of the disenfranchised through necessity, not choice. Nobody chooses to stay silent when they know that something's going wrong. They stay silent because the environment that they're in doesn't enable them to raise that issue. And sometimes that issue is, as you said, a harassment type focus. Sometimes that is based on safety matters. And there's absolutely no reason why one should affect the other.
Yeah, so you're saying safety reporting or having a better safety culture doesn't have to operate against discretion in terms of ownership and those details. The two can work alongside, and hopefully attitudes can open up a bit in terms of the reporting.
Yeah,
culture.
Absolutely. And I think honestly, when I entered the yachting sector, when you first approach the yachting sector, confidentiality is something that you're very aware of. It's very obvious. And I think new entrants into the yachting sector they take it a bit overboard a lot of the time. They end up I can't tell you the name of the yacht or where I'm going or whatever like that, or all these kinds of things. But when you've actually been in and around the industry for a while, there are two types of conversations. There's the conversations that people inside the sector have to people outside the sector, where it's very likely that they just will decline to say anything, which is completely appropriate, and they shouldn't. But when you are having those conversations inside the sector with peers inside the sector, then a lot of the time that conversation is much more open. Now, again, nobody really cares. Honestly, if you speak to yacht crew, they don't care at all who the owner of the other person's yacht is. They're not interested. They can Google it, and it will be on Google if they really want to go and find out, right?
Yes.
But nobody cares, ultimately. But there is real willingness, and I think CHIRP has shown that through the success of the CHIRP Superyacht project so far, and all the support that I've talked about earlier on, is that there is real willingness, real eagerness to talk about things that are operationally focused, be it safety, be it welfare, be it various elements of operations and refits and new builds and all these other types of conversations. And that's as it should be, because we can only develop the industry together. We can only learn from each other if we're willing to talk to each other, which we are.
Yeah, and share. You maybe have already answered this, but I always give my guests a chance to tell me what they would like to see changed for the better. Is there anything you haven't already told me about that you'd like to see happen?
Well, can I give you two answers to that? I always seem to give you two answers.
That's cheating.
I'm a complicated man. I have to.
Okay,
you mind? Okay, good.
I don't mind.
First one is, I think, the more important one. Currently, there are yachts that are private and yachts that are commercial. And SOLAS, for whatever good old reason from a long time ago, explicitly excludes pleasure yachts from a lot of regulation. And so we end up with this rather perverse situation where, over the last 30 years, 40 years, the super yacht sector has changed beyond all recognition, from 24 meters is the line where the word super yacht starts. That's not even that's tiny, right? Like 24 meters. That is a boat nowadays. A super yacht now is 100 meters plus. They're insane. The industry has changed, and the industry is also professionalized hugely. Your previous organization, the MCA, was absolutely fundamental in putting in place the yacht-specific certificates of competency routes that were done, because prior to that, it was, no disrespect to the RYA, but just the RYA Yachtmaster qualifications, which are wholly inappropriate for operating vessels as they started to grow. And so that's changed. Fantastic. But we still have this bifurcation where you can have a 80-meter, 2,000-ton super yacht with, I don't know, 20 crew on board, or I'm making up some numbers here, at anchor next to its sister ship. And one of them has a private registration and one of them has a commercial registration. And those two vessels could have fundamentally and completely different requirements in everything from manning, certification, qualifications of the crew, safety equipment, how often they get inspected, whether they are required to operate safety management systems, whether they're required to have various certificates applying to them. And for anybody who's listening, who's probably going, actually, under this flag state, that's not quite true, and that's not quite true. Yeah, it is. Yes, it's complex, and yes, it varies, and yes, various flag states have various different versions of fully private through to vessels that kind of do a little bit of chartering through to ones that do a lot of chartering or fully commercial. It's incredibly complicated, but the point is, it shouldn't be. Yeah. The only justification in my mind, and this is the CHIRP position as well, there is one justification for a vessel of private registry. And that is that I own a boat. And if I own a boat and I take my family out for a sail or for a fish or go to anchor and have a swim off the boat or whatever, and I have got no qualifications because I don't have to, and there's a horrible accident and my family dies and I die in this horrible boating accident, that is a private operation. And that would be very sad. Don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting everyone should have a horrible accident, but that would be a very sad thing, but it's a private operation, and understandably, safety standards are lower when you just own your own boat. For me, the moment that you employ a single crew member on board, be it a captain, skipper, whatever, or a single deckhand to help you out with whatever it is, you now are not running a private operation anymore. You are now running a commercial operation where you have an employee, and you have a duty of care to that employee, both legally and morally. And so, for me, there shouldn't be any difference between the regulations that are then applying to that vessel if it has people on board. And so going back to that 70, 80 meter, whatever, how can it possibly be justifiable that there is a difference in regulatory requirements and compliance? And then really the kicker, because you talked about owners earlier on, the kicker is if the owner knew, because I think that's often the problem, right? Because actually, realistically, the owner probably doesn't know that the crew on board are less qualified than they would be if it was a commercial vessel, or that they have less safety equipment than if it was a commercial vessel, or they have less requirements for safety management than if it was a commercial vessel. I'd be very surprised if that owner goes onto their private jet and walks into the cockpit and starts asking questions, because there might be a difference between how a vessel's run, if it's this registration, or a plane is run, about whether it's this registration or that registration. So it's only in the owner's interest as well for us to operate these vessels to the same standard, to the highest safety standards. And one of my colleagues in CHIRP, a chap called Chris Andreasen, who is he's a proper expert at yachting, he's been around since Noah was a boy, he emphasizes the point that why in yachting, which is very much a maximalist industry, right? It is an industry built around perfection and the highest possible standards. Why then do we accept talk of basic training? Why do we accept talk of minimum safe manning or minimum requirements in terms of anything else? Like, we should be operating these things to the highest possible standard.
You have done a lot of work so far, Paul. Surely you can sort this out on an international basis in the next 12 months, well, and we'll come back to you.
It's certainly going to be one of our campaigns. Whether it changes anything or not is a different question. But the interesting thing is that one of the panels I was on at TSF last week, that question was on the board. What is the biggest? I can't remember the exact question. It's something like, "What's the biggest problem with the yachting industry, or the biggest thing that undermines safety in the yachting industry, or something like that. And there's a couple of different options. And the one that was selected by 85%, 90 odd percent of people in the room was regulatory differences between private and commercial vessels. So this is not Paul on his hobby horse bashing away at it. This is something that we all recognize is there. And so now we just need to try and figure out, navigate our way from where we currently are to this harmonization.
Yes, and that will be a bit of unraveling, I suspect, which will take some time. And now I did say you could have two.
You did give me two. I wasn't going to push that because I realized that my first one was a bit long. The second one is that CHIRP, it becomes irrelevant, honestly. Now, it's one of these things where, the Ice One Yacht Crew Helpline, they will happily say that we pray for the day that Ice One becomes irrelevant.
Not needed.
Because nobody calls us because everything's fine. And it's slightly trite to say it, but ultimately, CHIRP exists because people don't feel comfortable sharing these things non-confidentially. And that is sad. And until the point where people do feel confident sharing things non-confidentially in public, because actually the people on board the vessel where it happened understand that there's value in learning. The person it happened to doesn't want it to happen to anyone else, and they see it has value in sharing that. The management company or whoever it is that's involved in operating the vessel understand that lessons shared and learned are better than lessons that are not shared and learned, and actually they're proud of the fact that actually our vessel had this accident and we're going to talk about it openly because we care about crew safety as a differentiator, rather than we're going to pretend that none of the yachts in our fleet ever have any accidents because that's somehow a differentiator when it's so obviously untrue. That would be the utopia that we'd all be looking for. And if that was the case, the culture in the sector would be incredible and people would work safely and there'd be no need for us.
Yes, that's very nice. I love ending on a positive. Just to ask you, if we're going to leave the bridge now, if we're going to head off, did you put the water toys out for me? Because I was going to go down the water chute, leave the bridge and go and play with a few things out there. Did you put them out today?
I did actually. And because you are obviously the primary principal guest on board at the moment, we left them out for you without any concern to hours of rest or any other operation that we have to carry out. So no, you're more than welcome to go and use the toys, of course.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for joining me, Paul. And you've been really interesting to talk through about the super yacht sector and safety. And it's been a really nice conversation. So thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you. And I hope it's been valuable for your listeners. May I make a final appeal before we sign off?
Oh, yes. Of course you can.
Thank you. I say that the support that we get for people who talk about CHIRP is very much this is a brilliant platform, this is amazing, or we're so lucky we've got this, and this is amazing, great work, guys, and we use the publications and everything else. But often I think there's a passivity in terms of actually sharing our own stories. And for whatever reason that is, maybe it is the confidentiality angle, and hopefully I've laid out today how bulletproof that is. Maybe it's about the fact that that actually happened 10 years ago. It's not relevant, is it? It didn't happen last week. Or maybe just thinking that they just they don't have time or whatever. Everybody who's worked at sea for more than probably a couple of weeks has got some stories. And those stories are incredibly valuable. And it might be something that seems relatively silly to you. But if you actually think and you go back and you say, yeah, that thing happened to me a while back, maybe it's serious, maybe it wasn't serious, maybe it was a little near miss where you just thought, I wish that hadn't happened to me, I wish that someone else had learned that lesson. Every one of us can come up with half a dozen different reports in a matter of 10 minutes. And that would be my appeal, because if you believe that CHIRP is a good idea, and to be honest, if you've spent the last however long listening to a podcast about CHIRP and we've got to this point, I would suggest you probably do think it's a good idea, otherwise you have strange taste in podcasts. That if you want it to survive, then you need to contribute. So that would be my appeal, is if everybody has a story to tell, doesn't matter how long ago it was, it's fully confidential, and we don't need pages and pages. We need a paragraph. That's it.
Fishing vessel Great Falls Aberdeen Coast Guard, we are reading you out and clear.